Okay. Okay. All right. Mylene. Mylene? Is that how I say it?
Milan, but yeah, don't worry too much about that. Yeah, I'm very interested into hearing more about what you have to say, because I don't know, I find it difficult to communicate about difficult topics. So yeah, I would be very also interested in unpacking what people say as well. I find that analyzing the messages and also how they are constructed in terms of content, but as well in terms of like argumentation ways, like, and sometimes manipulation as well, because there's a lot of this kind of things, helps to understand also how to answer as well, if that makes any sense.
Great, thank you. And next, is it Janneke de Graaf? Or?
Hi. Yep. Hi. I guess I'm interested with messaging. I'm noticing that I'm kind of, depending on how much time I've got, I'm kind of switching between like just wanting to say, if I've got a short amount of time, just something really positive, just but noticing that then I feel like I sound trite. And then noticing as well that I've got, like, maybe I don't know if we all will find like a pattern of how we're messaging, if we're messaging consistently. And I guess, yeah, I'm just watching that, seeing how it pans out and kind of going, is that okay? Do I need to change anything, or is it just watching and seeing how it goes? So yeah, just interested to hear what you've got to share today. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Kate doesn't have a microphone, but we also have Kate with us. And then Abby.
Hang on.
I can hear you.
Oh, I do have mic on. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I should mute it after this. Yeah. So what the question was, how's it going? What am I hoping to get out of this?
Yeah, particularly what are you most interested in around values-based messaging? If there's anything, otherwise it's fine if there's not.
Okay, I came a bit late, so I missed the initial spiel. Sorry about that. But yeah, can you briefly say what you mean by values-based messaging?
Honestly, totally fine. If you came tonight with a specific thing that you wanted to learn about values-based messaging, that's what I'm asking for. If you didn't, if you're just here to hear what we have to say, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like,
I suppose this is kind of just more of a general thing, but I've found that I tend to get more out of writing the Facebook comments, because it tends to be a bit mixed in terms of the responses. Whereas the stuff comments seem substantially more racist, or like more heavily racist without a lot of alternative narrative. So it's really demoralizing just seeing all the downvotes when anyone tries to say anything against that that racist dialogue. But I suppose that probably means it's more important. I mean, I guess I don't know whether the Facebook is more visible and more viewed than the stuff comments. I don't know how many people read stuff comments, but yeah, anyway, so I guess there's nothing really specific that I came wanting to find out.
Helpful though. No, that's really helpful context, so thanks for that. And I actually realize I'm not sure how you want me to address you.
All's fine.
Paul? All right.
Yeah.
Paul. Good to see you.
Yeah. Yes. Good to see you as well. I'm particularly interested in the issue of decolonisation and what it really means to honour the treaty, and quite concerned that what that means in reality is completely different from how people perceive it. There is such a lot of ignorance around that, and how do we break through that? I personally didn't really learn what it meant until I was 40. Growing up in Canterbury, it took a long, long time to get through, do a few days of treaty education, and I learned so much. It was really mind-blowing. So I'm trying to push the conversation, as close to honouring the treaty as possible, which, of course, is not easy. I think, I guess it does imply considerable constitutional change, and and so to be honest, I'm working my way through a matter of fact at the moment. Picked it up at the launch about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and but I've been values driven since I was a teenager, and how to get those messages across. Well, I'm still learning at 45. So yeah. All right, so that's me.
Great, thanks, Paul. Well, it's really lovely to have you all here. I am now going to switch into sharing my screen with you. So hopefully you can see that. And I thought just before I jump into my presentation that I would give you a tiny preview of some data that I just got in. So this is a bit of research I was doing to try and find a degree of polarization on a couple of sort of issues that might be traditionally considered to be polarizing in New Zealand. So one of the things that we were testing was just giving people statements and asking them how strongly they agreed or disagreed with them. And one of the statements was that personal use of cannabis or marijuana should be decriminalised. And the other statement was that the Treaty of Waitangi is New Zealand's founding document and should be a central part of government decision-making. And what was interesting to me is that the disagrees on the treaty statement have gone down. They have gone down. So you can see overall 50% people either strongly or agreed or strongly agreed, and only 23% either disagreed or strongly disagreed. And then in the middle, where the people weren't sure, was about another 26. So, that's really half the population saying they either agreed or strongly disagreed. So it's quite good to remember sometimes that a lot of those voices that we're dealing with, they might be loud, they might leave a lot of comments, and it's very, very important to engage with those comments because for a whole lot of reasons that I know you already you don't probably need me to convince you on there. It's important because they're harmful to the people who the comments are being made about. It's important because people who make really strongly sort of negative comments can influence that 26% in the middle. There's a whole range of reasons why it's important, but I just thought you might be interested to see the support levels for that statement. And just for a comparator, for a comparator on the personal use of marijuana one, that is still much more polarised in New Zealand. So you have 42% agreeing and 36% disagreeing. So that has shifted in time. Anyway, I'm going to come to this presentation. We're going to kick off. And I'm going to go through a few of the slides and then stop and we'll have a chat, and then I'll go through a few more and then we'll stop and have another chat. So firstly, why values matter when we're trying to communicate. And the starting place for this is really around the fact that facts don't work. And this is kind of a very simple image to represent a very persistent myth in communication And it's a very widely held belief, actually. And many of us, even once we've been told it's not true, find it quite hard to let this go. And this is the information deficit myth. And the information deficit myth is basically that if people don't understand something, it's probably because they don't have good enough quality information, or it's because they have the wrong information. So the way to shift that is to give them new information or better information. If we give them that information, if we give them facts that sort of disrupt the misinformation that they currently hold, they'll weigh up the new facts against the old facts, see that the new ones are better quality. They'll do that in a rational way, and that will result in a decision or a different position. It's a very nice, tidy model of how humans' brains work. Unfortunately, there's absolutely no evidence at all that this is how brains work. Because, in fact, the way that we process new information is using a whole raft of different cognitive shortcuts. And 4 of those cognitive shortcuts are, firstly, how do we feel about the information when it lands, and how well does it match with our pre-existing beliefs? And in many ways, the way we feel about new information is actually determined by how well aligned it is with our pre-existing beliefs. The second cognitive shortcut we use is, does this information fit into a pre-existing mental model or story that I hold to make sense of the world? And I'll talk more about that. Another shortcut that we use is, do I trust this messenger? Is the person giving me this information somebody who I trust? And another way that we use cognitive shortcuts to assess and process new information is to see what other people think of the information. So we look around us and say, do other people believe this? And that's one of the ways that we will assess it. So to start with the first one, the power of feelings. This is something that you'll be extremely familiar with if you spend time in places like Stuff or Facebook. And we all have this experience. This is the experience where if information comes across our path, if we come across information, and that information aligns with our pre-existing beliefs, it will give us a feeling, an emotional feeling of satisfaction. And that emotional feeling of satisfaction will make us more likely to want to take the information on board and also to share it with other people. Conversely, if information comes to us which does not align with our pre-existing beliefs, which challenges our pre-existing beliefs, which is in conflict with our pre-existing beliefs, that will give us an emotional feeling of discomfort. And at the strong ends of that, it might give us an emotional feeling of outrage or of anger. And we will act in relation to that information based on that feeling. This can sometimes be a bit disconcerting to realise and to recognise in our own behaviour. I always think it's important to note that it's not a problem. It's actually like a fairly important survival mechanism. We have information coming at us all the time, very, very quickly, lots of information, and we have to be able to process it using shortcuts. We just don't have the time or the capacity to make these rational kind of way up of information. The problem is where people are placing purposefully misleading information in front of us. And there's a whole raft of reasons why in our current information environment, this otherwise kind of helpful evolutionary adaptation becomes less helpful. So the second thing that we do with new information is we say, does it fit within, does it fit into the causal story that I have to make sense of this aspect of the world? So one of the ones that I often use as an example here is when I've done research in the past around New Zealand, looking at New Zealanders' beliefs about poverty and inequality. We asked people, for example, how do poor people come to be poor and how do rich people come to be rich? And what we find is there's a very, very strong, dominant mental model or causal story, which says in terms of A plus B equals C, the A plus B is if people work hard, they will be able to get what they need and provide for their families. And the converse of that is that if people don't have enough, or if they appear to be making bad choices, or if they appear to be not providing for their children, it's because they haven't worked hard and they haven't made good choices. So that's the kind of causal belief, causal narrative people have. If you want to shift that, you can't shift that by just replacing one link in the causal chain. So you can't just give people a piece of information that challenges one link in that causal chain. You have to give them a whole new story. And when we do messaging, this is why we try to always craft, if we're doing full messaging, we always try to craft a message that gives people a new cause for the problem, as well as giving people a new solution. Because if you just remove the one link, people will seek to repair it. And the example I want to give of this, I don't know if any of you saw this recently, but there was an historian, a young woman historian, I can't remember her name, I should look it up actually. But anyway, she wrote a piece for the Spin-Off about the sort of myth of the widespread Māori the idea that there was a sort of widespread population throughout New Zealand of a pre-Māori population called the Moriori, and that Māori came to New Zealand and wiped these people out. And this is a story, a deeply held story or belief that people hold that belief in order to sustain their own value or idea that European colonization in this country was also justified, because it was very similar in this model, in this mental model. It's similar to what the Māori did to the Moriori. So she wrote a piece as a sort of an academic and historian who specialises in this topic, basically dismantling that myth and replacing that myth with a whole lot of well-established facts about what was actually known, what we know and don't know about that. But as part of those well-established facts, she recognised that there was in fact an ethnically separate group of people known as the Moriori on the Chatham Islands, and that there was a group of Māori who came from Taranaki, and that there was a conflict, and that some of the iwi from Taranaki killed the Moriori on the Chatham Islands, or some of them, not all of them. And she was really astounded to watch in the comments on her article that when she sort of when she broke that link in the chain of this previously widely held belief that Māori had wiped out Moriori, who basically lived right across New Zealand, and said, no, that's not what happened. Here's this one much more specific thing that happened, that people responded to that by simply rebuilding their chain with this one much smaller piece of information and saying, well, that's still kind of the same thing. So it's a really good example of if we just try and correct people's misinformation, they will just rebuild their causal story using the information that matches their belief and rejecting all the information that doesn't. So I guess that's the summary of that first part of my talk, is basically that our brains are biased, and they are biased in ways that have been really useful in our survival over the human evolution. So brains that had the ability to be biased in these ways, to sort of quickly assess information based on things like the credibility of the messenger or an emotional sort of response to whether or not it matched what we already knew, were brains that were more likely to survive. So this is kind of just something that has been very helpful to us, that continues to be helpful, but when misinformation is rife, it becomes really challenging. All right, before I move on to the next part, which is going to talk about why values matter in the context of messaging and how we use them, are there any comments or questions about that so far? I think. Oh, look.
Yeah. I was just thinking that a good resource on this is Michael Polanyi. Now, I can't remember the name of the book, but he's a great author on this sort of stuff. If people want to look that up and study further. Just a comment.
Right, thank you. Now, I don't know, there's this weird Q&A thing happening here. So there's apparently an audience tool here that people can add their questions into the Q&A. I don't know if that's something that, I don't think that's going to work. I think that's too fancy for me. I'll have to figure out how to use that in the future. But does anybody else have a question? And Anne, you might have to, I may not be able to see questions when I'm in this.
I'm in the chat and I don't see any questions.
Okay.
So, but yeah, guys, you can post your questions in there, but you have been posting stuff in there. So I'm assuming that you know that.
Okay, cool. I'm going to move on then. And yeah, just type question in and Anne will let me know if there's a question there. So yeah, so we have these strong emotional responses to information that doesn't fit our beliefs. Why? And as I said earlier, it's because our beliefs, we protect our beliefs because our beliefs support our values. And what do I mean when I say that? Values, when I use the word values, I'm specifically using it to refer to what these sort of widely held concepts about what matters most to us. And so an example of a value might be benevolence, you know, caring for others. And then I might hold a series of beliefs, and those beliefs are assumptions that I hold to be true to uphold my value of benevolence. So one of the values that maybe upholds my value of benevolence is that humans are inherently good. That might be a belief that I hold. And then information that challenges that can be quite difficult for me to process, and you know, my first response might be to challenge it. Values are also important because fundamentally, values are what motivate us. They're the reason that all of you are probably on this call and participating in this work. Our values set the context for our goals. Our goals create the kind of direction for our attitudes and our behaviours. So if we want to motivate people in any way, values are really important. So this is a map of values based on the work of a researcher called Shalom Schwartz. You can find a lot more about this values map in the Common Cause Handbook, which is another resource that, along with these slides, I can make sure that Anne has a copy of that for you all. But basically, this is based on some research that's been done in 53 different countries, so it's been done in a, you know, in a fairly cross-cultural way. Here you go, Anne has a copy of it. It involved, I think, up to 80,000 people in the research, and you can see it's a map of, I think, about 50 values. And these values are things that matter to people. So you can see in the conformity area there, politeness. Now, politeness is something that matters more to some people than it does to other people, right? And similarly, if you go up into the stimulation quadrant, excitement in life, that's something that matters more to some people than it does to other people. So the point about this map is not to say I'm a person who holds the value of universalism, that's me in that corner. It's that all of us probably hold values right across this map, but we prioritize some more than others. And this map is arranged in a way that reflects how likely it was that a person who prioritized one value would prioritize another. So to say that in a different way, the values that are close to each other on this map are most likely, it's most likely that if you prioritize one of them, you probably prioritize another that's close to it. So for example, if you strongly value a world of beauty, if that really matters to you, it's more likely that you would also value or prioritize the value of a world of peace. Conversely, the values that are far away from each other, if you strongly value one, you are less likely to strongly value one that's far away from it. So that's probably easy to understand. For example, if you look down at in the tradition quadrant, if you strongly prioritize the value of moderation and accepting your portion in life, it's less likely that you are going to strongly value strongly prioritize the values of daring or curiosity or adventure that you find at the other side there. So I guess the point here is these values are not, it's not a matter of figuring out where you fit, that you fit in one quadrant, the odds are that you will hold values from right across this map. And I will say that this research has not been done in New Zealand. It has been done across 53 different countries and across a wide range of different cultures. It hasn't been done in New Zealand. I do not know, and I could not say how the core Indigenous values of our country would map here, whether they would, whether they wouldn't, whether they would be consistent with those 53 other countries and cultures, or whether they wouldn't. That would be interesting work to do for somebody. It's not, hasn't been done. But the point is that at any given moment, most people who you're dealing with will hold a complex mix of the values on that map. And often, as you can see with the yeses and nos here, not only complex, but often contradictory values. So under any given issue, people may simultaneously value politeness and courage. And the question would be, under any given circumstances, which of those are you prioritizing over the other? And most of us will prioritize things differently in different contexts. So the context in which we're acting matters to the priority that we give to different values. And this is probably an image that you have seen before. It is, as you can see, an image of a white vase, although it may also be an image of two faces in profile. And it's just a really simple way to illustrate that what your brain does when it looks at this image usually is it can switch back from one to the other. And that in many ways is the work of effective messaging, is to switch people's brain into the value that they already hold that is most useful for the conversation that we want to have. So it's not saying I have to fundamentally change this person's values. This person has the wrong values, I have to change them. It's saying amongst the values that this person holds are some really helpful values, some values that are, pro-social, that are really, useful in the kind of the efforts of building a more equitable and just society. And instead of having to try and change their values, what that tells me is most people will hold those values, and my job is to switch them or toggle them into the more hopeful values that they hold. So I've come back to the map, and this is where I'm going to take my next break. And the next break here is for you to all, I have a question for you all. If you look at this map, you can probably see in the top part there is a yellow and green quadrants, and they are called self-direction, which has things like curiosity, creativity, self-respect and independence. There's universalism, which has things like broad-mindedness, equality, protecting the environment and social justice. And then there's a benevolence section, which has things like responsibility and care, friendship, love, helpfulness. That part of this map is a set of values that can be described as intrinsic. So these are values that are we're motivated by these values internally. There doesn't need to be any external motivation here. It's about they're values that give us a reward internally. And in the bottom part, in the bottom corner in the red and purple, two values, achievement and power. Achievement has things like success, capability, ambition, and influence. And power has things like social power, authority, public image, social recognition. These are what's known as extrinsic values. So these values matter to us in relation to the outer world. So in a sense, you can only be successful in relation to an outer world in this context. Ambition has to do with an outer world in that sense. So at the top half we have intrinsic values, and the bottom half there we have extrinsic values. The ones, stimulation and hedonism, can kind of go a little either way. You can experience those in intrinsic or extrinsic ways. And then conformity, tradition, and security likewise have aspects of both intrinsic and extrinsic values to them. The question that I have for you to have a think about and maybe leave your comment in the chat when you've had a chance to think about it. If you were asked which of these values do you think is dominant amongst the population of New Zealand, so which, and I'm talking about the high level ones here, like self-direction, universalism, benevolence, which do you think are most widely held in New Zealand today? I'm trying to see how I get back to. I think I have to stop the share for a minute. Okay, security. Abby says security.
Did you say on the top part of a screen or in everything?
In everything.
Okay. Then I would have to agree with security.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? I've taken the map away from you. I'll share it again.
Maybe family as well, or something like this.
The benevolence ones. Here. Why is it doing? So the family stuff, a lot of the family related stuff like caring for your own family falls into benevolence. The security category, I will say, is kind of, I find this one a little bit problematic the way it's framed, because it's framed as things like healthy, social order, clean. In fact, I would write it differently. I would say that whole quadrant is about fear of things going wrong. So it's not that I value a healthy family. It's that I'm afraid that my family is threatened by being unwell. Because just caring about the health of my family, I would put that up in benevolence. So, and caring that people belong, I would put that also probably in benevolence. But what happens in security is that my sense of belonging is threatened. That's where, like, I want to protect my sense of belonging, is what's happening down there. So I think that one is can be a little bit tricky. Any other thoughts? We've got universalism, benevolence, equality, power, more aware of massive visions. Really interesting observations. I find all of those really interesting observations. So here's what we know from the research. Based on the New Zealand Values Service. So I think there might be someone who could maybe go on mute. There's quite a lot of shuffling. I don't know whose that is, but if you're not on mute, maybe try it and see if it was you. So this is from a World Values Survey in 2011, and these are New Zealand values. And power, interestingly, is really quite low. And the top ones, as I think a couple of you noted, were very much benevolence and universalism. Although self-direction is also quite highly valued in New Zealand, which isn't really surprising when you think about that idea of valuing people who give it a go and creativity and adventure. What's interesting about this, what's important to note, is that this is not just what people said their values were. This is done based on a validated research tool, which is designed to kind of overcome our tendency to tell people what we think they want to hear. So this is based on a pretty rigorous research tool that is designed to actually reveal the values that are most important to people. So we can say with some confidence that those intrinsic values of benevolence and universalism are the most important values to most people in New Zealand. What's interesting is when you ask people what they think the most important values are, they tend to flip that on its head. So on the one side where it says reality, you see this is actually UK research, so we haven't done this exact experiment here in New Zealand. 74% of people in the UK strongly prioritised intrinsic values, and 26% of people prioritised extrinsic values. But when that same group of people were asked what values do they think other people in the UK prioritised, they flipped that on its head, and they thought that probably 77% of other people prioritised, 77% of people said that they thought other people prioritised extrinsic values, and only 23% thought that. So we call this the perception gap. It's worth bearing in mind, and it comes about in a number of ways. And one of the ways it comes about is people doing what you are currently choosing to do. You're choosing to do it for good reason, but other people have it happen to them just by accident, which is that we are constantly exposed to the loud voices of a relatively small group of people, is one thing, who don't really share the values of the majority of our population. So that's one thing that affects the perception gap. The second thing that affects the perception gap is that we have very powerful and well-resourced actors whose interest it is to constantly prioritise in public messages extrinsic values, which means power and wealth and security. And by powerful actors, I'm talking about almost all, at least until recently, the vast majority, I would say, of commercial messaging was around evoking in people either some sense of insecurity around their social status or their appearance, or their sense of belonging, or their state, their power. So that whole bottom quarter, a lot of commercial messaging is spent telling us that that's what matters. And then, of course, we've lived for 3 or more decades in a neoliberal political model, which also strongly emphasizes those extrinsic values and says that money is what matters and everything can be measured based on what it costs. So these two factors together have combined to basically give us all the impression that other people care much more about extrinsic values than they do. I think it's really useful to remember that. Not necessarily because all of the people who you are dealing with in your comment work fall into that 74% of people who value extrinsic, because you may be dealing with the 26%. But if you think about your audience being the majority of New Zealanders, and particularly persuadable New Zealanders, most of those people, 91% of New Zealanders, 90% of New Zealanders prioritise universalism. So these values that you are communicating are the most important values to most people. So why do values matter when we're influencing? Well, the good news is that we can prime helpful values, so people become more receptive to new ideas and evidence. And some of you may have seen this before, but these are some examples of priming. So the idea of priming is that you use words, metaphors, images to evoke in people the values that you want them to be using when they assess your information. So we're not changing people's values, we're just pulling to the front of their minds the values they hold that are most useful and that will make them receptive to our ideas. So in our case, it's going to be we're wanting to pull to the front of their minds their most benevolent and universal values. So how do we do that? Well, this is an example of priming the value of universalism. It's a cartoon done by Sharon Murdoch when a Prime Minister had her baby, and it says, "To baby Ardern and all the other babies born this day, that day, and every other day, may you always have someone to catch you when you fall and hold you high so you can shine your whole life through." Now, this is clearly, very explicitly and openly evoking and priming the value of universalism, universal love and care, and babies are obviously a really powerful way to do that. An example of priming an extrinsic value would be these billboards from our good friends at WWF, and it's kind of unfair to pick them because I'm sure there are Action Station billboards around that when we've done exactly this. If I just had more time, I could have found one. And basically this is, it's priming extrinsic value. It's saying that what matters is the cost. And the reason that we should save the Maui dolphins is not from that top quadrant. We're not saying we love and care about dolphins as creatures. It's not saying we love and value, these beings, and they matter to us, and they stand for something to us, and we intrinsically value them for themselves. It's saying we should save them because it's not that expensive to save them. And there's a really strong body of research that says, that this won't work with people who prioritize intrinsic values, and we know that most people do. Interestingly, this is also less effective than intrinsic values, even on people who self-identify as prioritizing extrinsic values. So just generally, this is a really non-effective approach. And finally, another approach that we often use is that we prime people's security values by frightening them. And this is something that we probably have done generally, most commonly in the environmental cause-based messaging. But the other place where we do a lot of it, I think, has been also sometimes in mental health and in health and even in justice. And this is just a frame that we really want to stay away from. We just don't want to prime people's sense of fear. We don't want to prime people's sense of needing to protect themselves, their family, not only because it does what I say in the slide, which is that it turns people's brains into machines for that can only process very, very simple information. And basically, when people are afraid, they're unable to process complex information, and what they want, what they crave, and what they will respond to are extremely simple solutions that make them feel safe, which is something that obviously Trump has used very effectively. The other reason we don't want to do this is that in countries where the security frame is evoked more often, it also has a strong correlation with people becoming more homophobic, more transphobic, more sexist, more racist. This frame has the effect of not only making people more conservative, not only making people want simple solutions, it simply makes people more likely to reject people who are different to them. And this works it bleeds out from our cause to every other cause that we're working on. So we really want to try and avoid that. This is just an example of an Amnesty campaign where they've completely reframed the way that they've been communicating about refugees coming to New Zealand. And they've done this really based on what they've learned around values-based framing and messaging. So even 2 years ago, you would have found a lot of messaging around firstly around the dangers and the violence that people were fleeing. Unfortunately, what we discovered is that has the tendency to trigger people's security frames and to make them feel frightened. And a lot of the values, other than the security value that was being framed, was this value sort of duty or responsibility or even competition. So we're not doing as much as other countries, we should do more. This is a really good example, this I Welcome campaign, of flipping all of that on its head. The core value that's being evoked here is the value of hospitality. The image is not one that's intended to frighten you at all. On the contrary, it's clearly designed to evoke the better future that we can all hope to contribute to if we welcome more refugees to New Zealand. So it's just an example of how you can really flip an approach to messaging on its head within a fairly short period of time and hope to start to shift the way that people are responding to it. All right, before we do the final tips, I'm going to pull out of the, oh no, actually I'll just do them quickly and then we'll have time left for questions. So when you are dealing with people's comments, you have this opportunity that a lot of people doing messaging don't have, which is that you can read people's comments and look in their comments for any pre-existing values, beliefs, and worldviews that might help you think about how to craft your response. And as you are looking for those pre-existing values, beliefs, and worldviews, it's always really helpful to remember that people hold complex and conflicting values. So you may find that people say things that seem deeply contradictory, and rather than challenging them on the part of their contradictory belief that you think is wrong, what the research tells us that it's more effective to engage with them on the part of their contradictory comment which you actually find helpful. So much more likely to engage with the part that's helpful, the value that's helpful, and prime that, do more with that. Pretty clear evidence that we want to use intrinsic values, so anything from those top 3 quadrants. We do that because we know that lots of people already prioritize them. We also do it because we know that evoking those for obvious reasons have really strong pro-social effects, particularly around issues around justice and equality. So what you get to do is to pick, identify, and then prime the most helpful intrinsic values for your idea. And I think that's it. That is it. So let's come back out of, wait, what am I doing? Stop share. Back into this mode. And I get to check back. And okay, so opinions and beliefs, but maybe they underpin similar values. All right. Alrighty, so I think I've caught up on your comments. I was thinking about the point that Abby made at the beginning about engaging in spaces where people are like more strongly opposed to the ideas that you are sharing, and how that is more emotionally difficult. I think the work that you're doing with this, and I, correct me if I've misunderstood it, but there are a couple of different strategic kind of tactics that you could be employing, and one would be to look for the comments where you see people expressing contradictory values and engage with them around the values that are helpful and useful, and that's where you're actually thinking that your contribution might shift that person's perspective or influence them in some ways. And other times my sense is that you're engaging in conversations where you don't think that you can shift the view of the person who's left the comment, but what's important is to kind of flip that perception gap, right? And the perception gap exists because folks who hold these benevolent values aren't there making comments. And by showing up and by making comments that sort of emphasize the importance of, racial justice in our country, you are sort of flipping the balance a little bit on that perception gap. But yeah, I guess we don't have a lot of time left, but I would be interested if anybody had any comments or questions.
That was really, really helpful. I just need to practice it, and I mean practice, because that doesn't come naturally.
No,
but it just explains a lot, and I can see it working.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say, like, I learned this stuff for the first time like 4 years ago, and it still doesn't come naturally. Like, it becomes more of a habit, but it's definitely counterintuitive sometimes. So it's good to also be part of a group of people who are kind of practicing it together, I think. Yeah. Would you say the same, Anne? Like, you've been kind of on this journey with me for a few years. Yeah.
Yes, but it's, yeah, I think it's, I just did the workshop a couple of months ago with Common Cause, and it just is amazing how much people do the things that are not helpful, like putting the facts there, busting myths. That's kind of what you want to do. That's yeah. So it's really helpful to learn about the values and try to do that more, because yeah, you can really see it working. And you can have good intentions but do a lot of harm if you're not aware of how these things work. So yeah, I think it's very important. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this night. I think it's really valuable. And I just like hearing it over and over again because makes a lot of sense.
I'm going to just pick up on something Anne said. And then I think maybe this is something that we should just do another session in a month or so because, or I don't know, you have a schedule, but at some point we should do another session. But Anne just mentioned busting myths, and I didn't have an explicit slide on that, but I probably should have, because what the research tells us is that, and it's that point that I was saying, if people hold a story in their mind, even if that story is completely wrong, so the myth, and you try to break it by giving them a new fact, they either just reject it, so it just bounces off, or particularly if you do this myth-busting thing where you basically repeat the myth in order to negate it. So you say something like, refugees are not terrorists. If people believe that refugees are dangerous, then all they are going to hear are the words refugees and terrorist. And the part where you try to tell them it's not true will just bounce off them. So that's why we say don't try and break a link in their model, replace it with something completely new. So replace it with a new story, which is people who come to New Zealand seeking refuge are people just like you and I wanting, to create a safe start for their family. So I didn't really say that explicitly, but that's something that I've changed my campaigning quite radically based on that. I no longer do what's called negating a frame, which is taking something that we believe to be wrong and unhelpful and just saying it's not true. And I no longer try to bust myths because it also doesn't work unless people already agree with you. So those are, and I think, Anne, maybe there's enough material to do another session at some point. Yeah, don't think of a blue tree. And I think that the famous one that Lakoff has, George Lakoff has in his book the book is called Don't Think of an Elephant, and it's fairly obvious as soon as I tell you not to think of an elephant that you probably think of an elephant. So that's a book, Don't Think of an Elephant, if you really like reading lots of stuff. Another one is Don't Buy It by Anot Schenker, which is obviously her using the same trick. Don't buy this book, don't buy it. Yeah. Cool. I think it's probably time to go, but I hope that was useful.
Yeah, very useful. Thank you so much, Marianne. We'll be meeting each other and talking about this stuff more. I'll share this slide with you guys, which is really helpful to have with you when you're doing the work. Yes, Marianne, we'll let you go, and maybe, I don't know exactly how it will work, but you're the owner of the recording now. Last time I had to put it on YouTube. I don't know if you still can get into our Action Station YouTube channel. You might very well be able to still. Otherwise I'll upload it, but I don't know if it's easy to get it from me to you, but yeah, we might have a little chat about that off this thing.
I can talk about that tomorrow. I have a report due tonight, so I have to get straight back to work, but if it's okay.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. You go do that. But yeah, a few people missed it, and it's very valuable stuff, so I definitely want to get the recording. All right. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Does anybody need anything else? Is there anything? Yep. Cool. So yeah.